Enemies are never a misfortune. They are an inheritance of power. The moment you rise, opposition appears. It does not matter whether you sought it or not. It comes with command as shadow follows form. To resent it is childish. To use it is sovereign. The instinct of the weak is to wish for harmony, to dream of loyalty without cracks, to beg that men who despise them might someday become friends. But friendship is fragile. It sways with convenience. Enmity, on the other hand, is granite. It declares itself. It forces clarity. It reveals men in their sharpest shape, and in that clarity, a ruler finds tools. An enemy is not merely an adversary. He is an index of your influence. He gathers forces against you, yes, but in gathering, he reveals where strength lies. He forces you to sharpen your instincts, to harden your defenses, to calculate your moves with greater precision. Without him, you would soften. With him, you are forced to govern with vigilance. Thus, his hatred becomes your discipline. Consider this: loyalty can be faked, but hatred rarely island. The mask of loyalty can deceive a ruler into fatal trust, but an enemy's scorn is honest. He shows you his weapon. He shows you his intentions. He cannot hide the dagger forever. In this honesty of opposition lies a strange kind of usefulness. Enemies are also the theater of your power. They allow you to display strength. They provide the stage upon which your justice or your ruthlessness can be demonstrated. By punishing one traitor, you instruct 1,000 wavering followers. By sparing one enemy, you display magnanimity that amplifies your image. The enemy is the actor upon which your role as ruler is projected. Without him, the theater of command would be silent. But there is a subtler art, not merely defeating enemies, but transforming them. This is the alchemy of power, turning hostility into service, converting resistance into tribute. An enemy once subdued can be more loyal than a friend, for he knows the cost of defiance. He has tested your strength and been broken by it. His loyalty is not born of affection but of necessity, and necessity is more durable than sentiment. To achieve this, one must resist the temptation of pure destruction. To annihilate every rival is wasteful. Corpses do not serve. Better to leave some defeated, yet alive, to bend their talents to your cause. A conquered enemy, if made dependent, becomes the sharpest servant. His memory of resistance keeps him bound. His knowledge of opposition becomes intelligence for your rule. Do not mistake this for mercy. It is calculation. Mercy forgives for the sake of virtue. Calculation spares for the sake of advantage. The difference is survival. The ruler who forgives without purpose is devoured. The ruler who spares with intent expands his arsenal. You will find that some enemies are more useful alive than gone. They may command factions that can be guided under your hand. They may hold influence you can redirect. They may become symbols, trophies of your ability to convert opposition into obedience. Others, however, must be crushed entirely. The art lies in discerning which to break, which to bend, and which to display as living proof of your dominion. And yet, you must beware. The enemy you spare today may gather the courage to strike tomorrow. Use him, but never trust him. Bind him with chains of necessity, with dependence, with fear, with debt. An enemy-turned asset must never forget that his survival rests upon your will. This is the dark art of strategic usefulness. It is not taught in schools of virtue, for it offends the gentle illusions men prefer. But power is not illusion, it is necessity. And necessity demands that you waste nothing, not even hatred. Your enemies will never vanish. New ones will arise as long as you stand above others. But if you learn to turn them into instruments, if you can wield hostility as a craftsman wields steel, then you will not merely survive your enemies, you will make them part of your reign. To lead is to be surrounded by those who plot. To rule is to turn their plots into pillars of your throne. An enemy, once recognized, is like fire contained within iron walls, dangerous if neglected, yet a source of light and heat when managed with control. To shun him entirely is folly, for neglect allows him to grow in silence, gathering strength in places unseen. To engage him recklessly is equally foolish, for conflict without calculation breeds ruin. The wise ruler watches his enemy as one studies a storm, not to halt its arrival, but to harness the winds when they blow. A storm can sink a ship, yet the same wind can also carry it further than calm seas ever could. There is a rhythm to opposition, a hidden utility in resistance. The presence of an adversary sharpens not only the ruler's mind but the loyalty of his followers. Men grow complacent in times of stillness. They forget why they obey. They drift into disunity. But when a visible enemy rises, their fears coalesce, their loyalty is renewed, and their need for leadership becomes undeniable. The enemy, by threatening you, binds your people to you more tightly than affection ever could. Thus, in his ambition to harm you, he unwittingly strengthens the cords of your authority. Understand that enmity creates contrast, and contrast is the lifeblood of perception. A ruler who faces no visible foes is often seen as irrelevant, for the absence of opposition breeds doubt about his necessity. But a ruler who contends with enemies stands illuminated, defined by the struggle, magnified by the resistance. The enemy gives shape to your command, as shadows give form to light. He forces history to notice you, because without him, you would simply be one more figure fading into obscurity. Yet caution is vital. A ruler intoxicated by conflict becomes enslaved to it. If you create enemies merely to perform victories, you risk turning the game into farce, exposing your theater as hollow. The art lies not in manufacturing endless battles, but in selecting with precision which hostilities to embrace and which to extinguish. Every enemy must be weighed not by personal insult, but by political usefulness. Hatred is cheap, strategy is priceless. When the time comes to bend an enemy into an ally, one must proceed with deliberate cruelty disguised as benevolence. Break his independence so thoroughly that his survival instinct binds him to you, then grant him the appearance of dignity. Let him keep fragments of honor so he may serve without despair. A servant stripped of all pride becomes reckless. A servant allowed to keep a mask of importance becomes reliable, for he clings to the illusion that he still matters. In this way, you bind him not by affection, but by the desperate need to maintain what little remains. There is also the theater of reconciliation. To be seen sparing an enemy can elevate your image beyond the reach of mere conquest. It casts you as master of not only victory, but of control over victory, the power to crush, yet the restraint to withhold. Men are more impressed by the ruler who chooses when to destroy than by the one who destroys blindly. But beware, reconciliation must always be rooted in utility. Never forgive merely to soothe conscience. Forgiveness without calculation is weakness parading as virtue, and it invites betrayal dressed in gratitude. The ruler must also remember that enemies are mirrors. In their hatred, they reflect the fears of the masses, the vulnerabilities of the state, the cracks in your armor. To study them is to study yourself, for they reveal what others dare not say aloud. Their accusations, even if false, are arrows pointing toward the wounds you must conceal or the strength you must reinforce. To silence them without learning from them is to blind yourself to truths that only opposition reveals. The cruel paradox is this: to rule is to need enemies, but never to depend upon them. To use them as scaffolding for your power, but never to allow them to dictate its shape. They must remain instruments, not composers. Tools of your necessity, not masters of your fate. That is the line a ruler must walk between annihilation and conversion, between theater and necessity, between mercy and control. For in the end, power is not measured by the absence of enemies, but by the ability to turn their presence into pillars of dominion. To reign is not to eliminate conflict, but to shape it so that even resistance becomes an echo of your strength. And when you have mastered this art, when you can bend hatred into service, when you can transform opposition into the architecture of your survival, then you will know that even your enemies, unwilling though they may be, are part of your empire. To understand the full utility of an enemy, One must think beyond the duel of individuals and into the mechanics of states. A ruler who eliminates all visible opposition leaves his subjects with no alternative to compare him against. At first, this appears as strength, yet in time it corrodes loyalty, for men grow restless when their choices are smothered. An enemy, whether near or distant, serves as a reference point, a reminder of why obedience to you is preferable to chaos under another. Without this contrast, the people's discontent turns inward, and their dissatisfaction seeks a new target, often the very ruler who sought to spare them the sight of rivals. Thus, in preserving certain enemies, you preserve your own legitimacy. An enemy, carefully managed, is also an instrument of fear. Men are easily united when they believe an external threat looms at their borders or within their walls. Their quarrels with one another vanish when confronted with the urgency of survival. A ruler who knows this does not waste the gift of a hostile presence. He magnifies it, cultivates it, ensures that his subjects see danger not in him, but in the figure arrayed against him. In this way, the enemy's existence becomes the glue that binds the state, the justification for sacrifice, the pretext for obedience. The greatest rulers have understood that war is not only fought with swords, but with appearances. Sometimes an enemy need not be destroyed to serve his purpose. He need only be kept alive in the imagination. The whisper of his threat is enough to command vigilance, enough to discipline the restless, enough to remind the people that their security flows from the hand of their sovereign. A ruler without enemies must invent them, for the absence of danger breeds arrogance and disorder among the ruled. Yet invention must never betray itself as theater. The illusion must wear the face of inevitability, or it dissolves into mockery. There is also advantage in adopting the enemy's strength. The habits of those who oppose you are often born of necessity, sharpened by the same struggle you endure. To study them is to steal their weapons without the cost of invention. A ruler who imitates only friends learns comfort. A ruler who studies his enemies learns survival, and in learning survival, he acquires dominion. Thus, the enemy becomes not merely a tool to be used, but a teacher to be plundered. But even as enemies instruct and strengthen, one must never fall into reverence for them. Respect may sharpen vigilance, but admiration clouds judgment. To admire the enemy is to invite hesitation in the moment of decision. A ruler who hesitates is already defeated. Study them, yes. Learn their arts, yes. But remember always that their existence is tolerated only because it serves your necessity. The moment they cease to serve, their destruction must be certain, swift, and absolute. Mercy that delays this reckoning is merely cowardice dressed as generosity. The ruler must also recognize that the usefulness of an enemy is not eternal. Time transforms necessity. An enemy who once bound your people together may, in the changing winds of fortune, become a liability too dangerous to preserve. An enemy who once taught you the edges of your weakness may, once mastered, offer no further lessons. At such a moment, his continued existence is waste, and waste is forbidden to those who rule. To cling to him out of habit is to let nostalgia govern in place of reason. Power admits no nostalgia, it admits only necessity. Enemies are also instruments in negotiation. They are the currency of diplomacy, the scapegoats of policy, the bargaining chips in the game of alliances. To show that you can control them, restrain them, or even reconcile with them at will is to display mastery to other powers. Foreign states study how you treat your foes as closely as how you treat your friends. To annihilate them all without calculation signals recklessness. To preserve them all without distinction signals weakness. The art is to manage them as a gardener manages fire and water, sometimes extinguishing, sometimes channeling, sometimes letting them flow wild to cleanse the ground. Yet above all, a ruler must guard against the most dangerous enemy of all, the one within his own camp. Betrayal from those closest to you cuts deeper than opposition from afar, for it wears the face of trust while wielding the blade of treachery. Here, too, the principle of usefulness applies. A traitor exposed can become an example. A disloyal minister, once punished, becomes a spectacle that instructs obedience better than any decree. The theater of betrayal, if staged correctly, strengthens loyalty among those who remain, for it teaches them the price of disobedience. Even treachery, then, can be repurposed into fuel for your authority. To rule is to transform hostility into architecture. Every rival is a stone, every act of resistance a tool, every hatred a resource. The ruler who understands this wastes nothing. He feeds on opposition, drinks from betrayal, builds his throne from the very forces that sought to topple it. In the end, he is not the man without enemies, but the man who has consumed his enemies and turned them into the walls that guard him. Power is forged in the friction of conflict, and no ruler ascends without enemies to define him. They are the pressure that shapes the metal of authority, the stones that form the foundation of dominion, the axes against which your instincts are honed. To deny their existence is to deny the nature of command itself. To resist their lessons is to weaken the very sinews of your state. Every enemy, whether brazen or hidden, offers insight into human desire, ambition, and fear, and every insight is a weapon if wielded with precision. There is a subtlety in using enemies that the inexperienced cannot perceive. It is not enough to defeat. One must absorb, convert, redirect. An enemy's knowledge of your weaknesses, his networks of influence, the loyalty of his followers all become tools if you understand the geometry of leverage. He may seek to undermine you, yet in doing so, he constructs pathways you can later exploit. The moment he acts, he reveals his structure, and every structure has seams. The ruler who sees them does not merely survive. He expands his domain on the skeleton of opposition. Fear is a currency more reliable than loyalty. It does not ebb with time, nor does it falter when fortune changes. A conquered enemy fears you. A bound enemy depends on you. A visible enemy unites your people in silent obeisance. Use these truths with care. Fear is dangerous when uncontrolled, for it can ignite rebellion as easily as it commands obedience. But it is a tool unparalleled in its precision, a blade that cuts without exposing the wielder. To turn an enemy into a servant is to transform fear into governance. The ruler must remember that enemies are also mirrors of ambition. In their challenges, they reveal what men value, what they covet, and what they will defend with tooth and nail. By observing them, you learn the hidden desires of those you govern, the inclinations of those who oppose, and the currents that swirl beneath the surface of society. Every act of resistance is a window into the human soul, and every insight gained is a step toward mastery. You do not merely counter opposition, you map it, dissect it, and make it instrumental to your rule. One must also wield patience as a weapon. The enemy who cannot be converted today may serve as a key tomorrow. To crush him prematurely is to discard intelligence, influence, and opportunity. Time, properly observed, transforms threats into allies, dangers into assets, scorn into submission. A ruler who acts without patience sacrifices potential for immediate satisfaction, and in the realm of power, immediate satisfaction is the herald of ruin. One must move with deliberate calculation, for the landscape of enmity is a terrain as treacherous as any battlefield, and misstep is fatal. The arts of deception and appearance are inseparable from the manipulation of enemies. A ruler must conceal the extent of his capacity, disguise the favor he grants, and veil the punishments he administers. An enemy who perceives your hand too clearly may retreat into shadows, regrouping where you cannot see, plotting where you cannot intervene. But an enemy who believes himself both defeated and respected becomes a reliable instrument, for he will act with caution, bound by fear, bound by recognition of his own limits, bound by the subtle chains you have placed around him. And yet, the ruler must never forget that all enemies are ultimately untrustworthy. To convert them is not to reform them, it is to harness them. Their loyalty exists only under duress, their obedience only under calculation, and their service only while it suits their survival. The moment they perceive an opening, they will test it. The moment they sense weakness, they will exploit it. This is the inescapable law of enmity. It is both opportunity and threat, reward and risk, instrument and insurgent. Mastery is not in eliminating this duality, but in orchestrating it. An enemy who has been transformed into an asset carries with him a tension that benefits the ruler. He is simultaneously fearful and capable, wary and useful, resentful and dependent. This tension produces results that neither loyalty nor friendship could yield. A servant who remembers the pain of opposition works harder to avoid its repetition. A subordinate who has known the knife of betrayal remains vigilant, proactive, and attuned to the calculus of survival. In such a servant, you gain not only labor but instinct sharpened by necessity, a mind refined by the memory of resistance, a force compelled by the shadow of your power. Thus, to govern is to wield enemies with the same hand that commands allies, to navigate hatred with the same eye that admires ambition, to transmute opposition into instruments of state. Every conflict, every insult, every plot contains within it a seed of utility, and the wise ruler harvests these seeds with care. He discerns which must be uprooted, which nurtured, which pruned, and which allowed to grow as reminders of the cost of defiance. In this meticulous cultivation, enmity becomes architecture, and the ruler's dominion unassailable. Every enemy presents a choice: to annihilate, to ignore, to convert, or to manipulate. The wise ruler weighs each path with unflinching clarity, knowing that every action reverberates beyond the immediate moment. To destroy an adversary too hastily is to sacrifice opportunity. To ignore him is to invite chaos. To convert him is to gamble on precision. To manipulate him is to weave a web that must never tremble. The calculus of enmity is exacting, and error is never forgiven by history, nor by those who measure strength with hunger in their eyes. Enemies are instruments of insight as much as they are instruments of power. Their strategies, their networks, their ambitions illuminate the hidden architecture of influence. A ruler who observes without intervention learns more than one who strikes impulsively. He sees not only the enemy's designs, but the vulnerabilities in his own state, the fissures in loyalty, the currents of fear that run through his people. An enemy, properly studied, becomes a mirror in which the sovereign discerns the shape of his authority, the breadth of his reach, and the limits of his perception. Manipulation is an art that requires both subtlety and ruthlessness. To bend an enemy without breaking him is to command forces larger than oneself. The ruler who crushes indiscriminately rules through terror. The ruler who bends strategically rules through mastery. By allowing the enemy fragments of power, moments of pride, appearances of dignity, the ruler binds him invisibly, shaping his obedience without the need for chains. Fear and respect are more potent when balanced, for they instill vigilance where loyalty cannot be imposed. Patience, above all, is the ruler's greatest weapon. Time tempers hatred, reshapes alliances, and amplifies opportunities. An enemy who resists today may become an indispensable ally tomorrow. A threat ignored for a season may unravel into a revelation that strengthens dominion. Yet patience is never passive. It is observation made tactical, restraint wielded like a blade beneath the cloak of calm. To wait is not to hesitate. It is to move in accord with the rhythm of necessity, letting events align themselves until action strikes with certainty. The theater of power is incomplete without enemies. They define the ruler's space, sharpen his instruments, and illuminate the contours of authority. A state without visible opposition is a vessel without ballast, adrift in the currents of complacency. But a ruler who orchestrates enmity, who channels it, who converts it into utility, transforms chaos into structure, risk into instrument, resistance into scaffolding. In the presence of adversaries, the architecture of power is visible, its lines drawn in relief against the tension of opposition. Even betrayal is a resource when understood as part of this calculus. Disloyalty exposed, punished, and reframed becomes a lesson to all, a demonstration that the machinery of authority is precise, unyielding, and observant. The enemy within, once revealed, becomes a tool for reinforcing obedience, an example whose shadow instructs more effectively than praise ever could. In this, The ruler's vision encompasses not only the overt struggles of the battlefield, but the covert dynamics of trust, fear, and ambition within his own ranks. Control over enemies requires balance. They must neither be annihilated prematurely nor allowed to fester beyond use. Each one carries potential for instruction, for influence, for consolidation of power. The ruler measures them as a master craftsman measures metal bending, heating, shaping, but never wasting a fragment. A well-managed enemy is an extension of authority, a living instrument whose motions can be anticipated, whose utility can be harvested, and whose presence enhances the stature of the sovereign who commands him. To transform opposition into architecture, one must embrace the duality of power and perception. An enemy is not only a threat to be neutralized, but a statement to be made, a proof that the ruler's reach is exacting, his judgment unerring, his patience inexhaustible. Those who watch the interplay of ruler and adversary perceive mastery in action. Those who study it learn the anatomy of survival. And the ruler who understands this duality governs not through fear alone, nor loyalty alone, but through the precise orchestration of both, calibrated to the rhythms of necessity and ambition. In the final reckoning, a ruler's genius is measured not by the absence of enemies, but by the transformation of enmity into dominion. To convert resistance into instrument, hatred into scaffolding, and betrayal into vigilance is the art that separates the transient from the eternal, the distracted from the sovereign. Every adversary, every rival, every clandestine plot, when approached with clarity, patience, and calculation, contributes to the architecture of enduring power. The ruler who masters this art does not merely survive the tides of conflict. He commands them, shapes them, and builds his throne upon their currents. A ruler must also comprehend the subtle power of dependency. An enemy who relies upon the sovereign for survival, for protection, for purpose, becomes a living instrument, its edges sharpened by necessity, its actions guided by instinct rather than conscience. This dependency is fragile, a taut wire strung between fear and opportunity, but it is infinitely more valuable than obedience obtained through loyalty alone. Loyalty can falter, fear can ignite revolt, but dependency, once cultivated, binds even the most ambitious to the hand that sustains them. The enemy becomes a perpetual reminder of who controls the arena of power, a sentinel whose vigilance is turned toward service. Even the perception of mercy can be weaponized. To forgive an enemy at the moment of vulnerability is to command gratitude, to sow confusion among his followers, to demonstrate superiority without the overt display of force. But mercy, carefully dispensed, is not weakness, it is calculation. It signals that the ruler's decisions are deliberate, that his authority is measured, that the survival of the adversary depends not on luck, but on the favor of power. In this delicate architecture, appearances are as vital as deeds, for perception governs the hearts and minds of men more reliably than law or threat ever could. Enemies also illuminate the limits of authority. In studying their movements, plotting their strategies, and anticipating their ambitions, a ruler discovers the fractures within his own state. Where loyalty is shallow, where fear is insufficient, where influence is dispersed, these are the spaces that the adversary exposes. The ruler who recognizes them does not merely close these gaps, he converts them into pathways for control, turning potential vulnerabilities into instruments of dominance. Every threat carries the seed of insight, every rival the blueprint of survival, every betrayal the architecture of vigilance. The art of turning enemies into assets is rooted in rhythm as much as reason. It requires the synchronization of observation, patience, and action, the cadence of calculation, the orchestration of perception. A misaligned intervention can provoke chaos, shatter carefully balanced dependencies, and convert utility into rebellion. But when executed with precision, the enemy becomes both instrument and proof, a living testament to the ruler's mastery over circumstance, an example that instructs both the loyal and the cautious. Timing, therefore, is not a matter of chance. It is a matter of design, as deliberate as the placement of a sentinel on the walls or the dispatch of a fleet to distant waters. Power also thrives on the subtle manipulation of expectations. Enemies can be leveraged to create illusions of strength, to exaggerate the reach of influence, to cultivate the perception that the ruler's dominion is both inevitable and inexhaustible. A visible enemy, restrained yet potent, signals to allies and rivals alike that control is precise, that strategy is deliberate, that intervention is always imminent. Those who observe without understanding may miscalculate, overestimating the enemy or underestimating the sovereign, but the ruler who orchestrates these perceptions bends reality itself, shaping belief as surely as he shapes action. The ruler must always guard against overreach, for the transformation of enemies into assets is perilous. A misjudged alliance, a miscalculated act of mercy, a poorly timed intervention can awaken resentment, embolden opposition, or erode the very structures one seeks to strengthen. Every action must be weighed against both present and future consequence, measured against the ever-shifting currents of fear, ambition, and desire. A ruler who fails to respect this balance risks converting opportunity into disaster, insight into folly, advantage into vulnerability. Precision is not merely preferred, it is survival. Yet, within this delicate balance, enemies can be the most loyal of instruments. Their actions are dictated by necessity, their ambitions tempered by awareness of limitation, their efforts aligned with the architecture of authority that sustains them. In this way, the adversary becomes the vessel of his own subjugation, a willing participant in the consolidation of power he once sought to undermine. Observation and manipulation, patience and calculation, fear and dependency, these are the tools that render opposition productive, that convert resistance into scaffolding, that make enmity itself a resource of enduring strength. Ultimately, the ruler who masters this art transcends conventional notions of victory and defeat. To annihilate an enemy is to claim a moment. To harness an enemy is to extend dominion across time. Each adversary preserved, each act of subtle manipulation, each calculated indulgence or restraint becomes a thread in the fabric of enduring authority. The enemy ceases to be an obstacle and becomes a component of the state's architecture, a living testament to the ruler's insight, a reflection of the careful calculation that sustains power in a world of unpredictability, ambition, and human desire. The sovereign who perceives this understands that power is not a prize to be seized, but a network to be maintained. Enemies, once instruments of chaos, become instruments of design. Their hostility is repurposed, their ambition is guided, their presence is woven into the machinery of governance. To rule is to manipulate these currents without losing balance, to observe without attachment, to act without hesitation, and to transform every threat into a testament of authority. Mastery is not in the absence of resistance, but in the orchestration of it. The ruler must recognize that every enemy carries the potential to teach, to reveal, and to reinforce the architecture of authority. Opposition is not merely an obstacle. It is a lens through which the dynamics of power become visible, a mechanism that exposes the hidden currents of influence, ambition, and desire. The careful observer learns to see through the veils of rhetoric and the masks of pretense, to discern where loyalty is fragile, where fear is dormant, and where ambition can be redirected. To wield this insight is to command forces invisible to those content with superficial victory, and to convert resistance into a tool that strengthens rather than threatens. Enemies are also repositories of information. Their networks, their alliances, their strategies are gifts to the ruler who watches patiently. Every whisper, every maneuver, every concealed motive offers data that can be used to extend dominion. Knowledge is not passive, it is active leverage. By understanding the enemy's intentions, by anticipating the ripples of his ambition, the ruler positions himself not merely to counter threats, but to anticipate them, to transform potential disruption into calculated expansion. Intelligence extracted from opposition becomes an armament more potent than armies or fortresses, for it allows the sovereign to act before chaos has taken shape. Yet the manipulation of enemies requires nuance. It is not enough to coerce. One must align necessity with utility, fear with self-interest, control with opportunity. An enemy forced into compliance through blunt domination may comply only superficially, waiting for the moment to subvert or escape. An enemy guided through calculated inducement, however, moves in harmony with the ruler's design, often unaware of the invisible strings that orchestrate his actions. The distinction between coercion and orchestration is the measure of true mastery. It is the difference between temporary subjugation and enduring authority. The ruler's patience is the forge in which these transformations are wrought. To act too soon is to shatter fragile dependencies. To act too late is to cede initiative to forces that may never be restrained. Observation, calculation, and timing are inseparable in this art. One must watch, measure, and anticipate, allowing events to unfold until action can be executed with maximal effect and minimal risk. The enemy, while appearing active, is in truth an extension of the ruler's strategy, moving within boundaries carefully constructed through foresight, influence, and subtle pressure. Dependency, fear, respect, and perception form the pillars upon which the manipulation of enemies rests. Fear ensures attention, dependency ensures participation, respect ensures restraint, perception ensures alignment with the ruler's vision. Each element must be calibrated with precision, for imbalance can create fractures that compromise both authority and control. The sovereign who neglects the interplay of these forces invites revolt, miscalculation, and the erosion of power. Those who master the orchestration of these dynamics convert enmity into a lattice of strength, a living framework that supports ambition without the need for constant force. Even betrayal, when understood as an instrument of governance, can be harnessed. The enemy who tests limits, who challenges authority, who reveals disloyalty, provides a blueprint for reinforcing structure, demonstrating consequences, and consolidating obedience. Punishment becomes pedagogy, exposure becomes architecture, resistance becomes reinforcement. In every act of opposition lies a lesson for both the ruler and those who observe, a living example of the precision, patience, and unflinching calculation required to maintain dominion over ambition itself. The ruler must also cultivate the art of invisibility. The most potent manipulations are those executed without the enemy's awareness, those that shape behavior while leaving the subject convinced of autonomy. To move through the currents of opposition without revealing the hand that guides them is the hallmark of mastery. Subtle adjustments, concealed incentives, and carefully measured concessions produce results more durable than coercion or punishment alone. The enemy, unaware of his transformation from adversary to instrument, becomes a vessel of power, compelled by necessity, guided by instinct, and aligned with the sovereign's strategy. In the theater of power, enemies are both stage and actor, challenge and instrument. Their actions reveal patterns, their ambitions expose weaknesses, their defiance tests boundaries. The ruler who perceives these truths converts the flux of opposition into a predictable, manageable, and productive framework. Conflict ceases to be merely destructive. It becomes generative, providing the materials from which authority, stability, and influence are constructed. To master enemies is not merely to survive against them, but to build from them a living architecture of control that sustains power across time and circumstance. In the final analysis, the transformation of enemies into assets is not an act of benevolence or moral superiority, but an exercise in pure strategic calculation. It demands clarity, patience, foresight, and an unflinching willingness to exploit every opportunity within the bounds of necessity. Those who fail to recognize the latent utility in opposition resign themselves to perpetual conflict. Those who embrace it convert resistance into a resource, hostility into scaffolding, and enmity into a testament of enduring authority. To command is to see the potential in every threat and to mold it with precision, turning the very forces that seek to undermine power into instruments that uphold it. Allies, like enemies, are instruments whose true value is measured not by sentiment, but by the clarity of their utility, and the precision of their alignment with the sovereign's purpose. Loyalty is never assumed. It is observed, tested, and shaped through circumstance. An ally who acts without direction is a liability. One who acts within the parameters set by the ruler becomes an extension of authority, a conduit through which power flows beyond the immediate presence of the sovereign. In this careful orchestration, every relationship is strategic, every favor measured, every concession a deliberate placement within the larger architecture of influence. Reputation, once cultivated, serves as both shield and weapon. It signals to adversaries that the ruler is vigilant, decisive, and inexorably present. It signals to allies that obedience is rewarded, initiative is guided, and ambition is framed within boundaries invisible yet unyielding. Perception becomes indistinguishable from reality. For those who observe the consequences of action or inaction, internalize the hierarchy of power without direct instruction. The ruler who manipulates reputation subtly ensures that every choice made by friend or foe alike reinforces the structure of dominion, turning public perception into a silent armament of compliance. Influence, unlike brute force, is cumulative. It spreads through networks, infiltrates ambitions, and shapes behavior before the need for intervention becomes visible. The sovereign who comprehends the architecture of influence does not react to events. He anticipates them, bending the currents of ambition, fear, and desire to align with his strategy. Every interaction, every decision, every display of power is a signal, a modulation of the environment designed to steer outcomes, to convert hesitation into opportunity, and to transform independent action into the predictable motion of instruments under careful orchestration. Even the smallest gestures carry weight. A timely word, a measured glance, a calculated omission. These are the levers through which perception, fear, and loyalty are adjusted. The ruler's attention to such details demonstrates that authority is present in all aspects of governance, visible not only through decrees and armies, but through subtleties that suggest omnipresence and omniscience. The enemy, unaware of the signals, aligns behavior subconsciously. The ally, perceiving guidance, channels energy in alignment with expectation. The sovereign thus extends dominion without visible exertion, a silent force shaping reality in accordance with design. Control over opportunity is inseparable from control over perception. Those who act with foresight understand that influence is often more potent than force, and that power expressed with subtlety can achieve what coercion never can. The ruler who manipulates perception, who guides the expectations of both allies and adversaries, constructs a reality in which his authority is inevitable, his actions justified, and his decisions uncontested. Enemies restrained, allies aligned, ambitions directed, all become instruments in a living mechanism whose efficiency derives from the sovereign's ability to see the patterns invisible to others. The art of political survival, then, is the art of orchestration, to manage enemies, to guide allies, to manipulate perception, to cultivate reputation, to control opportunity. These are the threads woven into the fabric of enduring authority. The ruler who masters them acts with precision, foresight, and an unflinching comprehension of human nature. He does not rely on idealism, morality, or abstract justice. He relies on calculation, observation, and the relentless assessment of utility. Every decision is weighed for consequence, every action measured against long-term gain, every interaction considered for its capacity to reinforce dominion. Even victory must be managed. Triumph achieved without foresight breeds complacency, emboldens adversaries, and invites unseen fracture. The ruler who consolidates victory through measured action, who leverages success to strengthen dependencies and recalibrate perception, transforms fleeting conquest into enduring authority. Each enemy subdued, each ally guided, each ambition directed, becomes a component in a system of power that functions independently, yet in alignment with sovereign design. The state, in this sense, is both fortress and instrument, built not merely of walls and armies, but of observation, manipulation, and precise orchestration. Ultimately, the ruler perceives that power is not a possession, but a dynamic equilibrium. Enemies, allies, perception, influence, ambition, each must be monitored, measured, and guided. The sovereign who fails to see the latent utility in resistance resigns himself to chaos. The one who perceives the hidden potential in every adversary, who transforms hostility into scaffolding, betrayal into instruction, opposition into instrument, achieves mastery. This is not a philosophy of virtue. It is the calculus of survival and dominion, the unflinching acknowledgement that authority is sustained not by sentiment, but by strategic precision, constant vigilance, and the relentless orchestration of human desire and fear. Deception is the currency through which the highest orders of influence circulate. It is neither immoral nor virtuous. It is a tool, precise, necessary, and unavoidable. The ruler who shuns deception exposes himself to the manipulations of others, surrendering initiative and surrendering the unseen battlefield on which dominion is maintained. Every promise, every declaration, every public gesture can be calibrated, adjusted, and leveraged to shape expectation, to channel perception, to mask intent. Those who believe in the transparency of power are doomed, for they mistake honesty for strength and underestimate the instincts of ambition, envy, and fear that govern human action. Subtlety is the ally of permanence. A carefully orchestrated lie, a half-truth artfully displayed, a selective omission can achieve outcomes that armies, wealth, and law cannot. The enemy is rarely vanquished by force alone. He is vanquished by the realignment of his assumptions, the recalibration of his fears, and the illusion of choice that binds his actions to the ruler's design. The sovereign who manipulates expectation converts opposition into compliance, hostility into cooperation, and uncertainty into a predictable pattern that can be exploited. In this theater, knowledge is leverage, perception is control, and deception is a lens through which reality is bent to necessity. Yet deception is not mere artistry, it is vigilance made manifest. The ruler must continuously observe the ripples his manipulations produce, assessing not only immediate responses, but the latent consequences that accumulate over time. A misstep, a hint too revealing, a misjudged signal can unravel influence and invite subversion. Therefore, deception is entwined with foresight. It is calculated action performed with awareness of human instinct and the unpredictable currents of ambition. The truly sovereign mind does not deceive indiscriminately. It deceives strategically, instrumentally, and with the patience of one who understands that mastery is achieved through orchestration, not impulse. Even the perception of honesty can be weaponized. When enemies or allies believe in the integrity of the sovereign, they become pliable, their ambitions tamed not by fear, but by trust, a trust constructed, maintained, and guided with the same precision applied to fear and coercion. By controlling perception, the ruler ensures that each actor moves in accordance with invisible boundaries, internalizing limits and reinforcing authority voluntarily. Power, in this sense, is as much the control of thought as it is the control of action. The mind becomes a battlefield where influence is exerted, allegiance cultivated, and opposition neutralized before it manifests in deed. The ruler who masters deception also understands the value of restraint. Force applied prematurely reveals intent, impatience exposes strategy, and overreach breeds resistance. To act is to risk, to delay is to observe. Strategic timing, therefore, is inseparable from manipulation. Each interaction, each concession, each threat must be measured against the tempo of ambition, the cadence of fear, and the flow of perception. The sovereign moves like a conductor, guiding discordant elements into harmony, shaping chaos into instrumentality, transforming the unpredictable into the structured, the hostile into the useful. Isolation is a companion to mastery. The ruler who is surrounded by allies without scrutiny or enemies without observation loses clarity. Solitude sharpens perception, revealing subtleties that vanish amid noise, allowing the sovereign to perceive undercurrents, to anticipate motives, and to act with precision. From this vantage, Even the smallest ripple of dissent or the faintest glimmer of ambition can be transformed into insight, and insight into leverage. Power, when exercised in full awareness of the terrain and the instincts that animate those who inhabit it, becomes not merely sustainable, but nearly inexorable. In the architecture of dominance, control is both external and internal. The ruler must command not only the actions of others, but also the impressions they carry, the beliefs they hold, and the expectations they construct. Perception becomes an instrument, loyalty a mechanism, fear a catalyst, and deception a lens through which authority projects permanence. The state, the network, the alliance, all are extensions of the sovereign's cognition, instruments harmonized through subtle manipulation, calibrated influence, and relentless observation. Each component functions in relation to every other, a living system orchestrated by the mind that perceives, anticipates, and shapes. Every encounter with friend or foe is a test of alignment, a probe into the limits of utility, a gauge of loyalty or threat. The ruler must remain vigilant, assessing not only what is said and done, but what is withheld, what is implied, and what is feared. To misread subtlety is to invite subversion. To fail to exploit opportunity is to waste leverage. Power is not an inheritance. It is a continuous engagement, a relentless management of forces visible and invisible, a dynamic interplay between ambition, fear, desire, and perception that never ceases. The ruler's ultimate instrument is the transformation of opposition into architecture. Enemies, manipulated with insight and patience, become scaffolding for dominion. Allies, guided with precision and subtlety, become conduits of influence. Perception, calibrated through artful display and selective revelation, becomes armor and weapon alike. Influence, extended through networks and reinforced by anticipation, converts unpredictability into structure. Every act of deception, every moment of observation, every display of restraint reinforces the sovereign's dominion and extends the reach of authority beyond the immediate grasp of force or law. The mastery of power is, therefore, a solitary endeavor, executed in the quiet calculus of the mind, tested against the instincts of those who would oppose or ally, and refined through observation of consequence. The ruler who understands this transforms the tumult of human ambition into an ordered mechanism, where enemies sustain authority, allies reinforce purpose, perception shapes reality, and influence extends dominion beyond the limits of presence. In this relentless orchestration, the sovereign achieves not merely survival, but the enduring command of circumstance, a dominion constructed through intellect, patience, and the unflinching application of strategic insight. Ambition is the undercurrent that shapes every engagement, the invisible force that guides behavior, the silent engine of both loyalty and dissent. The ruler who discerns ambition in its many forms, overt and covert, expressed and suppressed, gains mastery over outcomes before they manifest. To overlook ambition is to invite unpredictability. To manipulate it is to convert potential threat into instrumentality. Every subordinate, every ally, every adversary carries within them a spark of desire, a seed of aspiration. It is the sovereign's task to understand its direction, to channel its energy, to bind it in service of larger design. Those who attempt to suppress ambition outright provoke resistance. Those who harness it achieve compliance without confrontation. Betrayal, the shadow that accompanies trust, is both hazard and opportunity. The ruler who fears betrayal becomes reactive, hesitant, and constrained. The ruler who anticipates betrayal transforms it into revelation, a mechanism through which loyalties are tested, alignments clarified, and authority reinforced. Each act of treachery unveils weakness, exposes hidden motives, and presents openings for strategic realignment. To master betrayal is not to eliminate it, for human nature ensures its recurrence, but to integrate it into the architecture of dominion, converting threat into knowledge, disloyalty into leverage, and opposition into utility. Fear and respect are distinct, yet intertwined instruments. Fear compels obedience. Respect secures alignment with principle, perception, and ambition. The sovereign who cultivates fear without balance risks rebellion. The sovereign who relies solely on respect risks manipulation. The equilibrium is achieved through measured displays of consequence and competence, the subtle interplay of intimidation and reassurance, the orchestration of perception so that the governed internalize both boundaries and aspiration. In this delicate calibration, power operates invisibly, flowing not through coercion alone but through anticipation, perception, and the disciplined alignment of desire with consequence. The theater of appearances is never trivial. Symbols, gestures, and public acts function as the language of authority, translating abstract power into perceivable reality. Every decision, every public moment, every demonstration of resolve signals intent and capability. Those who fail to manage appearances surrender initiative, allowing perception to be shaped by rumor, misinterpretation, and the uncalibrated ambitions of others. The ruler who controls appearances controls narrative. He molds expectation, constrains opposition, and channels ambition toward outcomes favorable to his design. Reality, in this sense, is inseparable from its perception. Dominion is as much about what is seen as what is done. Isolation, observation, and patience form the trinity of strategic foresight. The sovereign who isolates himself from the distractions of sentiment, who observes with acuity the impulses and alignments of those around him, and who exercises patience in action, cultivates a vantage from which the currents of power are visible. From this vantage, the flow of influence, the emergence of threat, and the opportunities for leverage are apparent. Impulse and reaction are the enemies of authority. Deliberate calculation, informed by observation and restrained by timing, is its ally. In this quiet vigilance, the ruler transforms uncertainty into predictability, chaos into instrumentality, and the latent energy of human ambition into structured dominion. The management of information is central to power. Knowledge of the ambitions, fears, and weaknesses of others enables anticipation and manipulation. The selective release of information guides behavior and constructs reality. Those who underestimate the importance of information are constrained by circumstance. Those who wield it as a tool achieve outcomes disproportionate to visible resources. Every whisper, every rumor, every secret when employed strategically becomes a lever of influence, a channel through which the sovereign extends control, directs action, and aligns perception with purpose. Even alliances must be measured for utility. Friendship is a facade, loyalty is conditional. The ruler who evaluates alliances through the lens of strategic benefit, who discerns transient alignment from enduring utility, and who structures obligation to reinforce authority, transforms the complexity of human relationships into a network of predictable instruments. Allies become extensions of the sovereign's will, capable of executing intent at a distance, reinforcing authority in multiple theaters, and stabilizing the architecture of power against the unpredictability of circumstance and ambition. Control is therefore not a static possession, but a dynamic process, a continuous negotiation between perception, ambition, loyalty, and fear. The ruler must adjust constantly, calibrating every gesture, testing every alignment, and converting every interaction into knowledge or leverage. Authority is sustained through vigilance, foresight, and the relentless orchestration of variables that are visible only to the patient, observant, and calculating mind. The sovereign who internalizes this principle achieves a dominion that extends beyond force, law, or proclamation, a dominion embedded in the instincts, perceptions, and ambitions of all who inhabit the sphere of influence. The ruler's ultimate achievement is the transformation of hostility into architecture. Enemies guided by calculation become instruments of stability. Rivals channeled by subtle influence reinforce authority. Perception manipulated with precision constrains opposition before it arises. Every act, every observation, every measured display of force or restraint becomes a component in a living mechanism whose coherence is maintained through insight, patience, and relentless assessment. Power is not conferred, it is constructed, continuously calibrated, and perpetually defended through the mastery of human instinct and circumstance. And so, the path of mastery concludes not in celebration, nor in the fleeting triumphs of force, but in the quiet dominion of understanding. The ruler who has learned to see ambition as a tool, betrayal as revelation, fear as instrument, and perception as armor walks alone, yet unassailable, through the currents of human instinct. Every enemy converted into usefulness, every ally aligned with precision, every outcome anticipated and shaped, forms a lattice of power that extends beyond presence, beyond circumstance, beyond time. In this silence, the sovereign recognizes the truth that those who yield to sentiment, who mistake morality for strategy, or who confuse honesty with authority, fall to the chaos they fail to master. Dominion, in its final form, is the exercise of foresight over impulse, the orchestration of human nature over the unpredictability of desire. It is the transformation of opposition into structure, of fear into loyalty, of perception into permanence. It is the understanding that power is neither earned by virtue nor maintained by indulgence, but by the relentless, disciplined, and unflinching engagement with reality as it is, not as one wishes it to be. And in the stillness of reflection, the ruler sees that his empire, whether of state, of influence, or of circumstance, is built upon the subtle architecture of minds, the careful calibration of instincts, and the unceasing vigilance over the invisible forces that govern action. Here lies the ultimate revelation, that mastery is not conquest alone, nor dominance alone, but the unbroken integration of insight, patience, strategy, and the relentless shaping of reality to purpose. The dark art of strategic usefulness is complete when enemies no longer threaten, but serve, when opposition is harnessed, not destroyed, when perception and action converge into a singular, unassailable will. The ruler has turned the machinery of human nature itself into a force that perpetuates authority, sustains dominion, and secures the permanence that lesser minds mistake for fortune. In this final reckoning, there is neither glory nor applause, only the quiet, immutable power of one who has understood the rules of the world and, through calculated mastery, bent them inexorably to his design. The lesson endures. Control, influence, and power are born from understanding, exercised through subtlety, and maintained through relentless vigilance. Those who learn this, who embody it, who live it as instinct and strategy intertwined, step into a dominion not of whim or chance, but of enduring command, the ultimate realization of the dark art of turning enemies into assets and chaos into structure. The sovereign's hand is steady, his mind clear, and his dominion absolute, for he has mastered not only the world around him, but the currents of human nature that flow unseen beneath it.